The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was bigger than most cities. Its ceiling reached so high that clouds sometimes formed near the top. 47 different species had seats in this hall, each group sitting in their own special section designed for their needs. The tall, blue-skinned Altarians sat in chairs that looked like ice crystals. The gas-form nebula dwellers floated in special containers that glowed with soft light. The rock-like granite people sat on stone blocks that would crush most other beings. Every species had what they needed to be comfortable, all except one. The human section looked plain compared to the others. Simple metal chairs around a basic table. No special lights, no exotic materials, no environmental controls. Just 5 humans sitting quietly as the vote results appeared on the massive display screen above them. Hyun-woo stood up slowly from his chair. He was not young anymore. Gray hair touched his temples, and lines marked his face from years of difficult conversations. As the head of the human delegation, he had spoken for Earth and all human colonies for 23 years. Behind him sat the other 4 humans. Ji-Hai, the trade specialist who had helped create deals between species that had never trusted each other before. Do-Yoon, the military advisor who had stopped 3 wars without firing a single shot. Yoonji, the scientist whose research had saved millions of lives across dozens of worlds. And Tai-Min, the young diplomat who everyone said would lead the delegation someday. Now there would be no someday. The vote was clear on the screen. 46 species had voted. 46 had said yes. The motion passed. The human delegation will be removed from the Galactic Council due to disruptive behavior and failure to follow established protocols. Veltar, the council arbiter, spoke from his high platform. His voice carried easily through. The hall translated into 47 languages at once. The vote is complete. The human delegation has 7 days to gather their belongings and leave council space. In the human section, no one moved for a long moment. The other species watched. Carefully, many expected anger, some prepared for threats. The humans had small bodies but big weapons. Their military was not the strongest, but it was fast and unpredictable. Everyone knew humans did not like to lose. But Hyun-woo just nodded. He looked around the hall one last time, his eyes moving, slowly from section to section. Some species looked back at him. Others looked away. A few seemed uncomfortable, but none spoke against the vote. "We understand," Hyun-woo said. His voice was calm and quiet, but it reached every corner of the Great Hall. "We will be going now." He picked up a small box from under the table. It held the few personal things he kept at his desk. A photo of his family back on Earth, a pen his daughter had given him, a small stone from the first human colony world. Nothing important to anyone else, but everything to him. Ji-Hai gathered her trade agreements and data tablets. Do-Yoon rolled up the military cooperation charts he had worked on for years. Yoonji packed her research notes into a simple bag. Tai-Min closed the thick book of council rules he had been studying, knowing he would never need them again. They walked toward the exit together. Their footsteps echoed in the suddenly quiet hall. No one said goodbye. No one wished them well. The 46 other species just watched them leave. As they reached the great doors, Tai-Min looked back once. He was young and still believed things could change. Maybe someone would stand up. Maybe someone would say this was wrong. But the hall stayed silent. Outside the council building, their ship waited. It was not big or fancy. Human ships never were. They built for function, not beauty. Admiral Sang-hee stood at the bottom of the loading ramp. She had been waiting for them with a crew of 20 humans who worked at the council complex. "How did it go?" she asked, though she could see the answer in their faces. "As expected," Hyun-woo replied. He handed her the box with his personal things. "They voted us out. All of them." Sang-hee had commanded human fleets for 30 years. She had fought in the border wars and the pirate conflicts. She had seen things that would give most people nightmares, but right now she looked tired. "Orders, sir?" she asked. Hyun-woo looked back at the great building one more time. Lights glowed in thousands of windows. Inside, the council was probably already planning how to divide up the responsibilities humans had handled. They would create new committees and write new rules. Everything would be official and proper. "We go home," he said simply. "All of us. Every human in council space. We pack up and we leave." "Just like that?" Taemin asked. 25 years of building relationships, of helping solve problems, of making friends across the galaxy. "We just walk away?" Hyun-woo put a gentle hand on the young man's shoulder. "They have made their choice, Taemin. They believe they will be better without us. Perhaps they are right. But what about the mining project on Kepler Station? Ji-hai has 12 species working together there for the first time in history. They will figure it out," Hyun-woo said. "The medical research?" Yoonji asked quietly. "My team just found a cure for the Gray Plague. 3 species are waiting for the treatment. They will find another way." Do-yoon spoke up. "The peace talks with the hegemony? I was supposed to meet with their generals next week." "Someone else will handle it." They boarded the ship in silence. As the engines powered up, Admiral Sang-hee sent a message to every human ship in council space. The message was simple. "Come home. All of you. Bring everything. Leave nothing behind." Within 6 hours, human ships were leaving from 1,000 different locations. Trade stations, research facilities, military bases, diplomatic outposts. Some humans had lived in council space for their entire careers. Some had made their homes on alien worlds. But when the message came, they all began packing. The council had expected anger or bargaining. They had prepared for legal challenges and political pressure. Some species had even worried about sabotage or revenge attacks. Instead, they got efficiency. Humans packed their things, finished their current projects, filed their final reports, and left. They followed every rule perfectly. They completed every requirement exactly. They even paid their outstanding bills. Within 1 week, every human was gone from council space. In the Great Hall, 46 species continued their work. The business of governing the galaxy went on. New committees were formed to handle human responsibilities. New procedures were written. Everything was proper and official. But something felt different. The hall seemed quieter, though the same number of beings filled it. Conversations felt longer, but somehow said less. Problems that had seemed simple before now felt complicated. Veltar told himself this was normal. Change always felt strange at first. The council had existed for over 1,000 years before humans joined. It would exist for another 1,000 years after they left. Still, that night, alone in his office, he found himself looking at the reports humans had filed before leaving. Everything was perfect. Every detail was complete. Every procedure had been followed exactly. It was almost like they had expected this day to come. 6 months had passed since the last human ship left council space. Veltar sat in his office reading the morning reports like he did every day. The coffee was good, imported from the Altarian trade worlds. The weather control system kept his office at the perfect temperature. Everything was running smoothly, except for the reports. The first one came from the mining consortium on Kepler Station. Veltar remembered this project. 12 different species working together to mine rare crystals from an asteroid field. It had been one of the Council's biggest success stories. The human trade specialist G. Hai had somehow convinced 12 groups who had never trusted each other to work as a team. Now the project manager, a tall Altarian named Kethvar, was asking for help. The different species were arguing about everything. Work schedules, safety procedures, who got to use which. Equipment first. 3 groups had already threatened to quit. The human coordinator had systems in place, Kethvar wrote in his report. But we do not understand how these systems worked. Each species feels the others are getting unfair treatment. We need guidance on how to proceed. Veltar made a note to send a diplomatic team to help sort things out. These kinds of problems could be solved with proper procedures and clear rules. It would just take time. The second report was from the Trade Commission. 3 separate conflicts had started between member species in the past month. The crystalline entities claimed the silicon builders were copying their designs. The gas form wisps said the nebula dwellers were stealing their territory. The rock people accused the metal workers of selling defective equipment. Commissioner Hyojin had been gone for only 4 months, but already the carefully balanced trade relationships she had built were falling apart. Each group felt they were being treated unfairly. Each demanded the council take their side. Trade Commissioner Genthal, who had replaced the human, wrote, "These disputes require immediate attention. However, following proper council procedures, each complaint must go through formal review, committee analysis, and full council debate. This process will take approximately 18 months per case. I request additional staff and extended deadlines." Veltar sighed. 18 months to solve problems that Hyojin had handled in a few days, with a couple of meetings and some creative thinking. But proper procedures were important. They could not just rush through complex issues. The third report made Veltar pause. It came from the frontier medical stations. Dr. So Young had been working there for 8 years, studying diseases that affected multiple species. Her research had led to treatments that saved millions of lives every year. The new medical director, a qualified Altarian doctor named Sailth, was requesting emergency assistance. Without Dr. So Young's ongoing research, 3 treatment programs had stopped working. Diseases were coming back. People were dying. The human doctor's methods were unusual, Sealth wrote. She would spend days talking to patients from different species, asking about their home worlds, their families, their daily habits. We thought this was inefficient. We tried to focus on pure medical analysis instead, but the treatments she developed based on these conversations worked better than anything we created through standard procedures. We do not understand why. Veltar. Read the report twice. So Young had treated patients like people, not just medical problems. She had looked at their whole lives, not just their symptoms. It seemed obvious now, but somehow no one else had thought to do it the same way. He moved to the next report. This one was from the Academy for Interspecies Understanding, the school that humans had created to help young beings from different worlds learn to work together. The current director, Teacher Subin, had been gone for 6 months. Her replacement, a respected educator from the scholar worlds, was struggling. The students from different species were forming separate groups. The Altarian students only talked to other Altarians. The rock people kept to themselves. The gas form beings floated in their own corner. The human teacher had methods for encouraging cooperation, the report stated. Students from all species participated in mixed groups. They learned each other's languages and customs. They formed friendships across species lines. We have tried to continue these methods, but we do not achieve the same results. The students seemed to prefer staying with their own kind. Veltar remembered visiting the academy when Subin was still there. He had seen Altarian children playing games with rock people youngsters. Gas form students had been working on art projects with crystal entities. It had seemed natural and easy. Now it seemed impossible. The reports kept coming. The terraforming project on New Haven had stopped working. Without environmental specialist Yi Wan, the different life forms on the planet were fighting instead of cooperating. The carefully balanced ecosystem she had created was falling apart. The archaeological expedition to the ancient ruins had found nothing new in 6 months. Xenoarchaeologist Jun Ho used to make major discoveries every few weeks. His replacement followed all the proper procedures but had not found anything significant. The diplomatic mission to the far reaches had failed completely. The local species had refused to meet with anyone except the human who asked good questions. They did not trust anyone else. By lunchtime, Veltar had read 15 reports about problems that had not existed when humans were part of the council. Each report asked for more time, more resources, more staff to handle issues that single humans had managed easily. He walked to his window and looked out at the great plaza below. Thousands of beings from dozens of species moved through the space, going about their daily business. Everything looked normal and peaceful, but something was wrong. During the afternoon session, the council tried to address these problems. Representative after representative stood up to propose solutions. More committees were formed. New procedures were written. Additional funding was approved. But the solutions felt heavy and slow. Everything required multiple meetings and formal approvals. Simple problems became complex because they had to be handled in official ways. Veltar found himself thinking about how humans had worked. They would talk to people directly instead of filing formal requests. They would try new approaches, without waiting for committee approval. They would ask simple questions that somehow made complicated problems seem easier. "What does this actually accomplish?" Hyun Woo used to ask during council debates. The question had seemed annoying at the time. Now Veltar realized it had cut. Through hours of pointless discussion. "Who benefits from keeping things this complicated?" Ji-Hai would say when trade negotiations got stuck on minor details. The other species had thought she was being rude. Now they were spending weeks arguing about things she would have solved in an afternoon. That evening, Veltar stayed late in his office. He read through old human reports, trying to understand how they had made everything look so easy. Their methods seemed simple, almost obvious. Talk to people like people. Ask what they actually needed. Look for solutions that helped everyone, instead of following rules that helped no one. But when other species tried the same approaches, it did not work. They followed the human procedures exactly, but something was missing. The next morning brought more reports. The mining consortium was down to 8 species. 4 groups had quit and gone home. The trade disputes had grown into economic boycotts. 2 frontier medical stations had closed because they could not treat patients effectively. Veltar read each report carefully. He made notes and scheduled meetings. He followed all the proper procedures for handling council business. But in the quiet moments between official duties, he found himself looking at the empty space where the human delegation used to sit. The cleaning crews had removed their furniture months ago. New plants had been placed in the area. Everything looked neat and official, yet somehow the space still felt empty. That night, alone in the great council hall, Veltar stood where Hyun-woo used to give his speeches. The human had never been the loudest speaker or the most dramatic. He had just stood there and said simple things that made sense. Veltar tried to imagine what Hyun-woo would say about the current problems. Probably something direct and practical, something that would make everyone else feel a little foolish for making things so complicated. But the hall remained silent. The humans were gone, and their simple solutions had gone with them. For the first time since the vote, Veltar wondered if they had made a mistake. 2 years had passed since the humans left. The morning alarm in General Gentar's office played the same soft tune it had for decades. He rolled out of his sleeping pod and checked the war reports like he did every day. But these days, the reports got worse instead of better. The Hegemony War had started as a small border disagreement. 2 minor species arguing over 3 empty planets that nobody really wanted. When humans were still part of the council, General Woon-seok would have handled this kind of problem in a week. Woon-seok had a strange way of stopping wars before they started. He would show up with just 1 ship and ask to meet with both sides, not to negotiate or make threats, but just to talk. He would sit with the commanders and ask about their families. He would share meals with them. He would listen to their stories. Aggressive. Diplomacy, he called it. Most other species thought it was crazy. You did not stop wars by having dinner with your enemies. You stopped wars with superior firepower or careful negotiations through proper channels. But somehow, Woon-seok's way had worked. 3 times in the past decade, major conflicts had ended before they really started. The commanders would meet with the friendly human general, and suddenly their fight seemed less important than going home to their children. Now Gentar stared at casualty reports that climbed higher every day. The small border disagreement had spread to involve 6 different species across 12 star systems. Fleets that should have been protecting trade routes were destroying each other instead. He had followed all the proper procedures. Formal protests had been filed. Diplomatic committees had been formed. Peace negotiations were scheduled to begin in 4 months, after all the correct paperwork was completed. Meanwhile, people kept dying. The problem was not just the war. Across council space, conflicts that had been quiet for years were starting up again. Old grudges between species that had learned to work together were coming back to life. Trade partnerships were breaking apart over minor disagreements. In the old days, humans would have been involved in solving these problems. They had a talent for getting different species to see each other as people instead of threats. Now, without that human perspective, everyone was going back to their corners. Gentar walked to the research labs to check on the science projects. Chief Scientist Min-ho had been gone for 2 years, but his absence was felt most strongly here. The man had convinced 37 different species to fund and staff joint research stations. Scientists who had never trusted each other were working side by side on projects that helped everyone. The current research director, Dr. Kellen from the Scholar Worlds, met Gentar in the main laboratory. The place looked different now. Where? There used to be mixed teams of various species working together. Now there were separate sections. Altarian scientists worked with other Altarians. Rock people researchers stayed in their own area. Gas form beings floated in their special chambers. How are the projects going? Gentar asked. Dr. Kellen looked uncomfortable. We are making progress, but it is slower than before. The teams are not cooperating as effectively as they did under human management. What is the problem? Mistrust, Dr. Kellen said simply. Each species believes the others are stealing their ideas or getting unfair advantages. The Altarians think the rock people are too slow. The rock people think the gas forms are unreliable. Everyone thinks everyone else is plotting against them. Gentar remembered visiting these labs when Minho was in charge. Species that had been enemies for centuries were sharing equipment and celebrating each other's discoveries. Altarian chemists were working with rock people engineers to build things neither could create alone. How did the human make it work? Gentar asked. Dr. Kellen shrugged. He treated everyone the same. He did not care if you were from a powerful empire or a small colony world. He listened to everyone's ideas and found ways to combine them. He made people feel like they were part of something bigger than themselves. That afternoon, Gentar visited the terraforming projects. Environmental specialist Yewan had been gone for 2 years, but her work had been falling apart for months. The woman had a unique way of approaching new worlds. Instead of just changing them to suit the dominant species, she would study every form of life present and find ways to make them all work together. Her replacement was following standard terraforming procedures: atmosphere adjustment, temperature control, soil modification, all by the book, all completely proper and completely failing. On New Haven, the carefully balanced ecosystem Yewan had created was collapsing. The imported plants were killing the native species instead of living alongside them. The rivers were changing color. Strange new diseases were appearing. We followed all the established protocols, the new director explained to Gentar. But the human woman had somehow created relationships between species that should not have been able to coexist. We cannot replicate her methods. That evening, Gentar attended a council session about the growing problems. Representative after representative stood up to propose solutions. More funding for military operations, larger diplomatic teams, extended time frames for negotiations. Everything required more resources and more time to accomplish less than humans had done with simple conversations. During a break, Gentar found himself talking with Veltar in the corridor outside the Great Hall. The problems keep getting bigger, Gentar said. Veltar nodded. We are handling them according to proper procedures. But the procedures are not working. They will work. They just take time. Gentar looked through the windows at the city, below. How much time? How many more people die while we follow proper procedures? Veltar did not answer right away. When he did speak, his voice was quieter than usual. The humans did not follow proper procedures. No, they solved problems. They asked uncomfortable questions. They made people think about things differently. They treated everyone like equals, regardless of how powerful their species was. Gentar thought about this. And we voted them out because their methods made us uncomfortable. We voted them out because they disrupted the established order. The established order that is failing to handle basic problems. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the traffic in the plaza below. Beings from dozens of species moved through the space, but they moved in separate groups. Altarians with Altarians. Rock people with rock people, gas forms in their own areas. When humans had been around, the groups had been more mixed. People from different species had walked together, worked together, eaten together. It had seemed natural then. Now it seemed impossible. I have been reading old human reports, Veltar said, trying to understand how they made things work. What did you find? They did not treat problems as species issues. They treated them as people issues. When there was a trade dispute, they did not think about Altarian interests versus rock people. Interests. They thought about families trying to make a living. Gentar nodded. Woonseok used to say that every conflict was personal to someone. If you could understand the personal part, you could find a solution. But when we try the same approach, it does not work. Because we still think like our species first. Humans seemed to think like people first. The session resumed, and they returned to the Great Hall. More reports were presented about failing projects and growing conflicts. More committees were formed. More procedures were written. But the solutions felt hollow. Everything took longer and accomplished less than it had when humans were involved. Simple problems became complex because they had to be handled through official channels. Late that night, Gentar stood alone in the council chamber. He looked at the section where humans used to sit. The area had been converted into a small garden. Pretty plants from various worlds grew in neat rows. Everything was organized and proper. But he remembered what it had looked like before. 5 humans sitting around a simple table, talking quietly among themselves during breaks. They had not looked impressive. Their technology was not the most advanced. Their military was not the strongest. Their economy was not the largest. Yet, somehow, their presence had made everything else work better. Now, without them, the galaxy felt smaller and more divided. Species that had learned to trust each other were becoming suspicious again. Problems that had seemed solved were coming back stronger than before. The humans had not fixed everything. They had just made other people believe that things could be fixed. They had asked the right questions and trusted others to find good answers. Without those questions, the council was drowning in its own complexity. Every solution required more steps, more approvals, more time. Everything was proper and official and slow. Gentar wondered if the humans had known this would happen. In their final reports, they had been careful to document everything they did. Every procedure, every contact, every solution. As if they had expected someone would need to continue their work, but following their procedures was not enough. The galaxy needed their way of thinking, and that could not be written in a manual. As he left the chamber, Gentar realized that the council had not just lost 5 diplomatic representatives. They had lost a different way of seeing the world. And without that perspective, problems that should have been simple were becoming impossible to solve. 5 years had passed since the humans left council space. Veltar looked older now, though his species aged slowly. Gray patches had appeared on his skin, and he moved more carefully than before. The weight of leading the council during these difficult years showed in every step he took. The Hegemony War had finally ended 3 months ago. The peace treaty sat on Veltar's desk, thick as a book, and signed by representatives from 6 different species. Everyone called it a victory for council diplomacy. But Veltar knew the real cost. 17 star systems had been damaged or destroyed. 43 billion people had died. Entire worlds had been turned into graveyards. The war had lasted 3 years and consumed resources that could have built 1,000 new colonies. Before the humans left, General Woonseok had prevented wars. Like this, with a handful of meetings and some shared meals, he would show up with one ship and convince everyone to talk instead of fight. It had seemed too simple to be real diplomacy. Now Veltar understood that simple did not mean easy. The morning reports were better than they had been during the war, but that was not saying much. The trade networks had broken into separate blocks that barely spoke to each other. Medical research had slowed to a crawl without human intuition to bridge the gaps between different species' understanding of biology. But the report that hurt most came from the Academy for Interspecies Understanding, Cultural Liaison. Boram had been gone for 5 years, but the Academy was dying slowly without her. The Festival of Convergence had once been the greatest celebration in Council space. For over 2 centuries, beings from every member species had come together to share their cultures, foods, arts, and stories. It had been proof that different peoples could not just coexist, but actually enjoy each other's company. This year's festival had been a disaster. Instead of one great celebration, there had been dozens of smaller, separate events. The Altarians had held their ice sculpture contest in their section of the station. The rock people had displayed their stone carvings in their own area. The gas-form beings had performed their light dances in isolated chambers. No one had come to see what the other species were doing. No one had tried foods from other worlds. No one had learned songs in alien languages. The festival that had once brought the galaxy together had become a series of lonely parties. Cultural exchange requires trust, the current Academy director had written in his report. Without the human liaison to help different species feel comfortable with each other, they retreat into familiar patterns. They stay with their own kind. Veltar remembered the last festival he had attended while Boram was still there. He had watched Altarian children trying to carve stone with rock people youngsters. Gas-form artists had been creating light shows that told stories from crystal entity mythology. Boram had moved through the crowds like a conductor leading an orchestra, encouraging connections that seemed impossible, but somehow worked. She had made 1,000 different cultures feel safe in the same space. Without her, that safety was gone. The afternoon brought news from the Archaeological Commission. Xenoarchaeologist Jun Ho had been gone for 5 years, and his absence was painfully obvious in the lack of discoveries. His replacement was a qualified researcher who followed all the proper procedures. In 5 years, the team had found 3 minor artifacts and made no significant discoveries. Jun Ho had made major discoveries every few months. Ancient cities, lost technologies, first contact with previously unknown civilizations. His expeditions had been events that the whole galaxy watched with excitement. The human archaeologist had unusual methods, the current director reported. He would spend weeks talking to local people, listening to their stories and legends. We focus on scientific analysis instead. However, we have not achieved comparable results. The locals on frontier worlds had trusted Jun Ho because he listened to them like their stories mattered. He treated their folklore as potentially valuable information instead of primitive superstition. Other species saw this as inefficient. Now they were learning that efficiency without insight was just expensive failure. But the deepest loss was felt in the education system. Teacher Subin had been gone for 5 years, but her work at the Academy for Interspecies Understanding had produced something irreplaceable. A generation of young beings who thought beyond species barriers. Students who had learned under Subin's guidance were now adults working throughout council space. They approached problems differently than their elders. When faced with conflicts between species, they looked for common ground instead of taking sides. When starting new projects, they naturally included diverse perspectives instead of sticking to their own kind. These young adults were like seeds of a better future scattered across the galaxy. But without Subin to train new teachers, there would be no more like them. The current academy was producing graduates who thought in the old ways, seeing the universe as a collection of separate species instead of one large community. That evening, Veltar walked through the archives deep beneath the council building. Archivist J. Seok had maintained these records with careful precision for decades. Every decision, every treaty, every significant event in council history was documented here. Jae-seok met him in the main archive chamber, surrounded by storage units that held millions of documents. The archivist looked tired. His job had become much more difficult since the humans left. "I have been reviewing the records as you requested," Jae-seok said. "The pattern is clear." He led Veltar to a display screen showing statistical analyses of council activities over the past 50 years. Charts and graphs filled the screen, but the story they told was simple. Every major breakthrough in the past half-century involved human participation, Jae-seok explained. Every successful crisis resolution, every innovative solution, every significant advancement. The humans were not just members of the council. They were the catalyst that made everything else work better. Veltar studied the data. Trade agreements that had seemed impossible until humans found creative compromises. Scientific discoveries that had required human ability to get different species to share knowledge. Diplomatic solutions that had worked because humans asked the right questions. They were not the smartest species, Jae-seok continued. Not the strongest, not the most advanced, but they had something no one else possessed. What? They believed problems could be solved. Not just their problems, but everyone's problems. They had this certainty that if you talked to people long enough and listened carefully enough, you could find a way forward that worked for everyone. Veltar thought about this. And that belief was contagious. Exactly. When humans were involved in a project, everyone else started believing it could work too. When they asked their uncomfortable questions, other species started questioning their own assumptions. When they treated everyone as equals, it became harder for others to maintain their prejudices. They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by the documented history of galactic civilization. Thousands of years of progress, and setbacks, wars and peace treaties, discoveries and disasters. What does our current trajectory look like? Veltar asked. Jae-seok changed the display to show projections based on the past 5 years. The graphs did not look good. Declining cooperation between species, increasing conflicts, slower technological progress, reduced trade, weakening alliances. Without the human influence. "We are reverting to historical patterns," Jae-seok said. "Each species focusing on its own interests. Competition instead of cooperation. Suspicion instead of trust. How long before complete breakdown? At current rates? Perhaps 20 years before the council becomes completely ineffective. 50 years before member species start leaving to form their own alliances." Veltar felt something cold settle in his chest. The Galactic Council had maintained peace and cooperation for over 1,000 years. The idea that it might not survive another 50 was almost unthinkable, but the data did not lie. Without humans to ask the uncomfortable questions and find the unlikely solutions, the council was slowly falling apart. Late that night, Veltar stood alone in the great council chamber. The lights were dimmed, and the enormous space felt even more empty than usual. He walked to where the human delegation used to sit. The area had been converted into a memorial garden after the 3rd year. Plants from 46 different worlds grew in careful harmony. A plaque listed the names of the 5 humans who had served the council: Hyun-woo, Ji-hee, Do-Yun, Yunji, and Tai-Min. Dedicated to the pursuit of understanding between all peoples, the plaque read. Veltar touched the smooth metal surface. For the first time since the humans left, he spoke aloud to the empty chamber. "We told ourselves we were better without you," he said quietly. "We said you were disruptive and unpredictable. We said you did not follow proper procedures." His voice echoed in the vast space. "We were right. You were disruptive. You disrupted our comfortable assumptions and our safe prejudices. You were unpredictable. You found solutions where we saw only problems. You did not follow our procedures. You made us question whether our procedures were worth following." He looked around the great hall, imagining it filled with representatives from 47 species, including 5 humans who asked the questions no one else wanted to hear. 10 years had passed since the humans left. Veltar was old now, even by the standards of his long-lived species. His movements were slow and careful, and he needed assistance walking to the council chamber each morning. But he could not retire. Every potential replacement lacked something essential: the experience of working with humans. The young council members who had joined in the past decade had never seen how humans approached impossible problems. They had never watched Hyunwoo ask a simple question that made a complex debate suddenly clear. They had never seen Ji-Hai find a solution that left everyone feeling like they had won something valuable. Without that experience, the new representatives fell back on traditional methods: more committees, longer procedures, careful protocols that protected everyone from making mistakes. The system worked, but it worked slowly and accomplished little. Council member Kreshtal was one of these new representatives. She was young and intelligent, full of ideas for improving council efficiency. But when she tried to implement changes, everything got stuck in bureaucracy. "I do not understand," she said to Veltar during a break between sessions. "I have studied the archives. The council used to solve problems quickly. Major treaties were negotiated in weeks. Trade disputes were resolved in days. Crisis responses were implemented in hours. What changed?" Veltar looked at the eager young representative. How could he explain something he barely understood himself? "Read the human reports," he said finally. "Not the official documents, the personal notes and meeting transcripts. Try to understand how they thought." That evening, Kreshtal went to the archives. She pulled up files from 20 years ago when humans were still part of the council. She expected to find advanced negotiation techniques or sophisticated diplomatic strategies. Instead, she found conversations that seemed almost casual. Diplomat Hai Wan handling the Zephyrian integration crisis, not through formal negotiations, but by having tea with both sides and asking about their children. By the third day of informal conversations, the negotiators were designing schools that could accommodate both species young. The 40-year territorial dispute had ended over breakfast. Kreshtal read the transcript 3 times. There was no secret technique, no complex strategy. Heywan had simply treated the negotiators like people instead of representatives. She had asked about things that mattered to them personally, not just professionally. When enemies started talking about their children's futures, they stopped being enemies. It seemed obvious, it seemed simple. But when Kreshtal tried the same approach with current disputes, it did not work. The other representatives were suspicious of informal conversations. They insisted on following proper diplomatic procedures. Everything had to be official and documented. Meanwhile, the galaxy grew darker. The latest crisis was the most serious yet. A machine intelligence had appeared in the outer systems, consuming entire worlds to build more of itself. 3 star systems had already fallen. Traditional council approaches had all failed. Military force was useless. The machines adapted to every weapon and turned captured technology against its former owners. Diplomatic overtures went unanswered. The intelligence did not seem interested in negotiation. Technological solutions failed because the machines learned faster than the council could innovate. For the first time in its 1,000-year history, the Galactic Council faced a threat it could not handle. Emergency sessions ran day and night. Every species contributed their best ideas. Military strategists planned impossible battles. Diplomats crafted messages that would never be answered. Scientists designed weapons that would be turned against them. Nothing worked. In desperation, some representatives suggested abandoning the outer systems and building better defenses around the core worlds. Others proposed splitting the council into smaller alliances that could respond more quickly. A few extremist groups even suggested surrendering and hoping the machines would leave them alone. Veltar listened to all these proposals with growing despair. The council was falling apart just when unity was most needed. Fear was making everyone selfish. Each species was starting to think about its own survival instead of working together. Late one night, alone in the council chamber, Veltar found himself doing something he had never done before. He walked to the memorial garden where the human section used to be and spoke aloud to the empty air. "We need you," he said quietly. "We needed you then, and we need you now, and we will need you tomorrow. We made the galaxy smaller when we made. You leave, and we do not know how to make it bigger again." His voice echoed in the vast chamber, but no one answered. The humans were gone, scattered to distant sectors of space. They were building their own alliances now, solving other people's problems, asking their uncomfortable questions somewhere, far from council space. "You would know what to do," Veltar continued. "You would ask the right questions. You would find a solution that the rest of us are too frightened or too proud to see." He thought about all the crises humans had solved, not through superior technology or military might, but through understanding. They had found ways to communicate with beings who seemed impossible to reach. They had turned enemies into friends, by helping them see each other as people instead of threats. What question would you ask about these machines? Veltar wondered aloud. What would you want to know about them that the rest of us have not thought to ask? The chamber remained silent, but Veltar's mind began to work. What had humans always done when faced with something new and dangerous? They had tried to understand it. Not just how to fight it or avoid it, but what it wanted and why it existed. The council had assumed the machines were pure destroyers. But what if they were not? What if they had a purpose that could be understood? Humans would have asked, what do these machines want? Why are they consuming worlds? What are they trying to build? What would make them stop? No one had asked these questions because the answers seemed obvious. The machines wanted to destroy everything. They were consuming worlds because they were evil or broken. They were trying to build more destruction. Nothing would make them stop. But humans had taught the galaxy that obvious answers were often wrong answers. The next morning, Veltar called for an emergency session. Instead of planning new attacks or building better defenses, he proposed something that shocked the entire council. We should try to communicate with the machines, he said. The reaction was immediate and negative. Representatives jumped to their feet, shouting objections. Communication was impossible. The machines had ignored every attempt at contact. They were obviously hostile. This was a waste of time when action was needed. Veltar waited for the noise to die down. When he spoke again, his voice carried the authority of decades of leadership. "Have we asked them what they want?" he said simply. The chamber fell silent. It was exactly the kind of uncomfortable question humans used to ask. Have we tried to understand their purpose? Have we considered that their actions might make sense from their perspective? Have we wondered if there might be a solution that gives them what they need without destroying what we need? The silence stretched longer. Finally, young Crescital stood up. "How would we communicate with them?" she asked. "They have not responded to any of our attempts." "We have been trying to communicate like diplomats," Veltar said. "What if we tried to communicate like humans?" Over the following weeks, the Council attempted something unprecedented. Instead of formal diplomatic messages, they sent simple questions. Instead of demands to stop, they asked why the machines were doing what they were doing. Instead of threats, they offered curiosity. The breakthrough came when they stopped trying to talk to the machines as enemies and started trying to understand them as beings with their own needs and goals. The machines were not destroyers. They were builders. They were consuming worlds to gather materials for a massive construction project. They were trying to build something so large and complex that it required the resources of entire star systems. When the Council finally asked the right question, "What are you building?" the machines answered. They were constructing a vast, computational matrix designed to solve problems that biological minds could not handle. They were trying to find answers to questions about the nature of existence, the meaning of consciousness, the possibility of life beyond death. The machines had never meant to harm anyone. They had simply not understood that the worlds they were consuming were home to living beings. In their calculations, biological life was too brief and small to be significant. But when the Council explained about families and dreams and the value of short lives lived fully, the machines stopped their consumption. They began working with biological species instead of around them, finding ways to gather resources without destroying homes. The solution seemed impossible until it happened. The crisis that had threatened to destroy the galaxy ended with understanding instead of warfare. In the aftermath, as peace settlements were negotiated and reconstruction began, Veltar sat alone in his office reading reports of the successful first contact with the machine intelligence. The documents were full of technical details and formal procedures, but the real story was simpler. Someone had finally asked the right questions. Someone had treated an incomprehensible threat.